That's good. I like that.
Hi. Hello. We are back with another video covering the basic things that we see on typing, especially paper ones. And sometimes they show up on paper twos. They may just show up in longer forms, or they may have a distribution list, or sometimes a table included in it. But what we're doing today is we're talking about the famous memos. And so in order to understand memos, we first need to talk about what memos are and the different styles and how they differentiate between each other. Of course, we're going to take an example of at least 2 memo questions, and we're going to answer those questions and show you how it looks if you were to update a document or update a memo based on what you see in those instructions. All right, so what are memos? Memo is a short word for the word memoranda or memorandum, of course. These memos are documents that are less formal than a letter. They're used to correspond or send to people that work within the same company. So one office to another office in the same company. They're usually typed, sent out, and filed away. And so they're usually much shorter than a letter. They don't include any addresses. So you'll never find the address of somebody on a memo because, again, it's being sent to somebody in the office. So there's no need to put an address on it because, of course, that just means that there's no individual that needs a address because they're not using the post office to send this particular document. And so we're going to go through the different styles of memos right now. So we have our standard versus our simplified memo. These are your 2 types of memorandums. And again, just like with letters, it's important to know what they mean because the papers are going to ask you, give me a standard memo, give me a simplified memo. If you mix them up, then you're automatically reducing the amount of points that you can get. And so therefore you have to remember the difference between the 2. A standard memo is just a memo that normally that's the normal memo that's completed by persons in business, whereas a simplified memo, I like to say it's supposedly simplified because it doesn't have a heading, but it looks very similar to a letter, of course, without all of the addresses. And so let's look at what they look like now. Parts of a memo. When it comes to a standard memo, a standard memo actually has a heading. It has what we call a heading, which is your to, from, date, and subject. So the heading is specific to a standard memo, but the body, that's a part of all memos. Every memo is going to have a body, just like a letter. It's the details of the actual document. And then sometimes you may find notations at the bottom or throughout your memo, just like you would see with a letter. So some of the notations we see with a memo, with a letter, you also can see them with a memo. So that's something important to know as well. This here is an example of a memo, just talking about the different parts. Normally, this is a standard memo. Normally at the top of a standard memo, the word memorandum should be found at the top, and then a quadruple space, and then to, from, date, and subject. The to, from, date, and subject, like I said, these are your headings. And what you're going to see is to, from, date, subject are all typed in all caps. And then what you see is the information related to those are actually lined up here. And so I'm going to show you how to do that as well. You're going to write the information next to it. So who is it going to? Who's this memo going to? Who's the memo coming from? The date that the memo was written, and the subject, or what is this memo about, pretty much. And then, of course, you have your summary or your body that just gives the reader information on what is being shared in the same memo. So the format of a memo. Normally, with letters and memos, they carry the same 2-inch top margin. So there should be a 2-inch top margin and 1 inch left, right, and bottom. Of course, only if they do not give you any information. Now, keep in mind, this is very, very important. The question trumps your margin size. So if the question says, give me a 1-inch top margin for a memo, then you give a 1-inch top margin for a memo. No questions asked. If they don't say, then you go with your standard 2-inch top margin for a memorandum. The word memorandum should be located at the top of the page in bold and all caps for standard memos only. Simplified memos do not have the word memorandum. The headings, they're actually in order. To, from, date, and subject should also be in all caps and bold to the left margin, like we saw previously. Press tab to align the words following the headings. So in other words, they press tab so that all of these have a straight line. Because of course, if we would have just pressed space, JC would have started here, from would have started here, date here, subject here. What we do to figure that out is we take the word subject, or whatever the subject is, it is the longest line, and we press tab after the word subject, and that is where everything is going to line up because it's the longest word. And so that means the to might be maybe 2 tabs over, from maybe 2 tabs, date maybe 2 tabs, but at the end of it, when you're typing a standard memorandum, these should be in line. Going back, you double space after each heading. So you give some space in between each heading. The heading should be in order, and the subject of the memo should normally be in all caps. In the body, you're going to press enter between paragraphs just to make it look neat. And then, if applicable, you apply notations at the bottom. Now, of course, typist initials are usually at the bottom of memos as well. And so your typist initials will be a double space below the body. If applicable, sometimes there are attachments or enclosures, and we normally put them a double space below typist initials. If there are any copy notations as well, remember, if we want to send something to Sally, but we also want to send it to Diane, we would put a copy notation at the bottom for Diane, and that's going to be a double space after any attachments or enclosures, if any, as well. And so we'll go through an example where we're going to see some of those being applied. When we talk about memos, let's talk about distribution lists. And so sometimes a memo can be sent to more than one person at a time as the main recipient. So we're not talking about instances where there's a CC, right here, carbon copy. We're not talking about this instance, because this is normally you only carbon copy or copy somebody on a memo or letter if you just want them to know the information, but they are not the original receivers. And so in a distribution list, the original receiver of the memo is going to be more than one person. And so that's when a memo should be sent to various persons, place all the names in the to section, or add a distribution list at the bottom. And so when it comes to distribution lists, it's always suggested you can put them at the top unless they ask you to do otherwise. When you put them to the top, that just means that your to section is a bit longer than a previous letter or a previous memo, sorry. And so what happens is you would write the name of each person and you would press enter after and make sure everything lines up. Or you can press a comma in between each person's name as well. Either is correct. So either you're going to use a comma in between names or press enter and still align everything up accordingly. Normally you would list it according to order or rank. So managers or executives are normally first, and then other persons are below. But normally they don't make that too difficult for you in the actual exam. Sometimes you may have 2-page memos. If the memo goes to a second page, then we think about it just like a 2-page letter. We start at 1 inch from the top margin for the second page, and then we create a header with the recipient's name, page number, and date as well. There should be at least a double space, or at least two lines of the last paragraph should be on the second page. And of course, there should be a double space after this heading before you actually put the rest of the paragraph. So very similar to what we've done previously. So again, your styles of memo, we have standard and we have simplified. We didn't talk too much about simplified other than the fact that we said that they look like a letter. And so we're going to go into detail in that next. What it says is do not include a heading or the word memo. Definitely you never do that for a simplified memo. starting at 2 inches from the top with the date, then a quadruple space. So just like with a letter, after the date is a quadruple space. Next is the receiver's name or group of persons, whomever is receiving this memo, then a double space. Then is the subject in all caps, then a double space. Next is the body, then a double space, and then the name and title of the writer, followed by a double space that leads us to our typist initials. Okay, so let's just take a look at what this information has. I have an example of a few questions, and I have an example of a memo as well. And so this is a memo that has been created. And if you were to guess what type of memo it is a standard memo. And so according to our standard memo, we followed all of the procedures. We have a 2-inch top margin, and we have the word memorandum at the top, and it should be in bold. There's a quadruple space after 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have 2 from date and subject. Now we also have the body, a double space below the subject, and then initials, a double space below as well. Let's zoom a bit closer. When we zoom a bit closer, we see the details of the heading. And what I want you to know and see about the heading is that if I was to just type this and press space, how would this memo heading, the heading of the memo, actually look? And so let's see. If I was to just press space, everything is not properly aligned. And so this is where I'm talking about pressing tab after. As we can see, subject extends the furthest of all of the headings. So this is going to be our judge on where these parts here should start. And so normally you're going to press tab because that ensures that everything lines up evenly. And so now that I've pressed tab on the subject line, I'm going to go up to date, press tab, and see it lines up accordingly. From, press tab, it does the same thing. To, I had to press tab twice, and that's okay. It just lines everything up. So what you do is you make sure that you press tab until everything lines up according to how it's supposed to line up. This makes for a neat memo. Notice to, from, date, subject are all in caps, as well as your subject itself. The word memorandum is also in caps, and that's fine as well too. There is a double space in between each of these, which is also correct. When I look at my body, there's a double space in between paragraphs as well, just making it a bit easier for you to see. Because let's look at the difference. If we did it like this, it's not as clean, it's not as neat, it's not as easy to see the beginning of the new paragraph. And so it's always encouraged, if you have the spacing for it, definitely to make sure you include a double space in between paragraphs. Then there's a double space, and there's BB, which are my typist initials, of course, no punctuation involved, and they're both lowercase. Okay, so now let's take a look at some questions that we have from a past paper. And so let's look at past task number 3, simplified memo. Well, let's actually look at memo 2 first. Standard memo. Because the document I have open is already standard, that makes life simple. And so in the instructions here for standard or formal memo, they both mean the same thing, memorandum. It says key the standard formal memorandum on a full sheet of paper provided in the booklet. Using a 2-inch top, 1-inch left and right margin, center the word memorandum in all caps, followed by a quadruple space. So this is a pretty easy paper. They actually give you a lot of hints here because they don't have to tell you the margins. They don't have to tell you to put the word memorandum or the quadruple space, but they are so nice in this paper that they tell you to do that. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. The memo is coming from the Bahamas National Trust Park PAL coordinator, and it is going to the Eco Drive Committee. That means both of these people or these persons are in the same organization. They're just sending information to each other. The subject is proposed trip to view ecosystems. They even put it in all caps to help you out as well. Wow, this paper really is very helpful. But then they say follow all other instructions throughout the task. Most instances, the other instructions are just going to be proofreaders marks, corrections. So you want to make sure you know your proofreaders marks, corrections as well, how to address them as well. And so this one is pretty straightforward. For my document itself, of course, well, they're telling us that this is a full sheet of paper. And if you're not sure, a full sheet of paper just means that the paper itself is a whole paper. We're not cutting it in half. We're not printing it on a piece of the paper, but that we're using an entire paper. So whenever they say a full sheet, that means we have nothing to change as it relates to our paper size. Okay. Using a 2-inch top, 1-inch left. As a reminder, when we want to change margins, we can go to the layout tab, margins, custom margins if we want to. And this is where you can change, just type in exactly what you want. When we type in 1 inches, as you can see, it got a little shorter. But if I was to go and I was to put in 2 inches, there's nothing here that I can use. If I was to put the 2 back, you'll see that it pushed the word memorandum down a bit. And so it pushes your top margin down. So top margin, 2 inches, 1 inch, 1 inch, and bottom 1 inch, and we are good to go. There's nothing else to follow for that instruction. We already have the word memorandum typed in all caps, and in the center with a quadruple space following. The memo is coming from Bahamas National Trust Park PAL Coordinator. And so that just means that we go from, and we're going to change this from to Bahamas National Trust Park. Can't remember what else it says. Bahamas National Trust Park PAL Coordinator. Park PAL Coordinator. And then it says it's coming from, it's going to Eco Drive Committee. So to Eco Drive Committee. And of course, we know that these red squiggly lines just mean that there may be a typo error. It's not always correct. So what you want to do is you just want to go back and make sure Eco Drive, that's exactly as they have it. That's exactly as I have it. So there's no need to change anything. The date today, I can put March 26, 2023. And the subject they tell me is, what is exactly the subject? Proposed trip to view ecosystems. And so I'm just going to change my subject to do the same. Proposed trip to ecosystem. And always confirm what you've typed to view. Good. Always confirm what you've typed to make sure that you haven't left anything off. Because keep in mind, it's practice with business. It's business class. If you're supposed to be sending a message and you forget a piece of the message, that can be a major problem. That could be the difference between an employee being fired. It could be the difference between the store closing early and it's not supposed to. It could really make a difference. And so you always want to make sure you read over everything that you've done. And so based on this, your memorandum is now complete. My memorandum is done. It doesn't extend all the way to the bottom of the page because it's pretty short, and that's okay. As long as they say a full sheet of paper, you're good to go. Once you print this, it looks exactly the way it should look, and this is a standard memorandum. So to recap, standard memorandums have the word memorandum at the top in all caps and bold, followed by a quadruple space, and then the heading, which is to, from, date, and subject in all caps. Then the to is actually written tabbed at least twice, at least once, I guess. Once or twice, you press the tab key so that it lines up with where the beginning of the subject of the memo is. You want to make sure this is always lined up. You want to put a double space in between each heading line, a double space after the word subject, double space between bodies, and then a double space after the body itself. Like we said, if we had enclosures or attachments, what would have happened, or what should have happened? Double space, oops, and what did we see? This change might be to a capital B. And so one way I can do that is I can undo Or I can actually just go back and now put in my lowercase b and then continue to go back to the line where I was at and type as normal. And so let's say I had an enclosure. I'm going to put the word enclosure right here. Or if I had an attachment, I could put the word attachment as well. And then if I had a carbon copy, I could put C or CC. And then I would type who I'm CCing. So let's say I'm CCing Martha Stewart, I guess. Martha Stewart. Again, the C changed for me. So I'm just going to go here and undo. And now this would be a memo that includes an enclosure notation, again, meaning that there's something enclosed with this memo. An attachment, meaning there's something that's attached to the memo, very close, but depending on the wording that they say, you would use that particular notation. If they say that there's an attachment included, they're not going to tell you all the time to add the word attachment, but if you see they're attached to the memo is, then you're going to make sure you put the word attachment at the bottom. Same thing with enclosure. They may say enclosed with the memo is, and that means that they want you to put the word enclosure. If they say, I sent a copy of this memo to, normally that's going to be a CC to Martha Stewart or whomever the carbon copy is going to. And so this is a perfect example of a standard memo with these optional items included. So let's take all these optional items and let's look at the question number 1 that was selected, a simplified memo. And so normally at the top, they tell you simplified memo, standard memo. The first thing to do is try to remember what the format is so that you make sure you type it right the first time. You do not want to waste time while typing these papers, type in the wrong format, and then going back to fix it later. And of course, as a reminder, to fix things, we do not just delete. We don't have to start over from scratch. If the information is the same, we can simply go back and adjust for the things that we know we need to adjust for. And so we're going to do an example of that because we're going to take that same memo that we typed. We're going to leave the body the same. And we're going to leave the information, the to, from, date, and subject the same. And now we're going to turn it into a simplified memo, first of all. All right. So again, key the following simplified memo on a full sheet of paper provided. They tell you to use a 2-inch top margin and side margin of 1. Excellent. The memo is going to, that's your to, the Agricultural Bahamas Association committee members, and it's coming from the committee chairperson. So of course, in the to section, you're going to put the Agricultural Business Association committee members, and in the from section, you're going to put committee chairperson. The subject is proposed field trip to the Bahamas Agricultural, Marine, and Science Institute, BAMSI. So therefore, all of this, the Bahamas proposed field trip to the Bahamas Agricultural, Marine, and Science Institute, BAMSI, should all be in the subject, should be in all caps as well. Use the current date and follow all of the instructions given throughout the task. So based on what you've seen so far, especially from paper 1 memos, there's not much going on. They're not giving you much instructions. And so you just have to really know what your different styles are. And so let's take that same memo and we're going to turn it into a simplified memo. And so what I'm going to do, just so I can actually see side to side, I'm going to make a copy. So I just copied this memo, press Control and Enter to go to a new page, and I pasted it to the second page, just so we can see side by side what it looks like to change them. And so this is my standard memo. It's going to remain exactly the same, but my simplified memo is now going to be different. I do not need the word memorandum at all. Like we would have said, the date goes first. The date is the first thing on your memo when you're doing a simplified memo. So I just cut and paste it, or I can highlight it, and then using your arrow, just drag it wherever you want it to go. I just moved it from one place to the next. So my date comes first, followed by, just like a letter, a quadruple space. 1, 2, 3. So that's 3 spaces before I see typed words. So I'm going to add another one. So now when I do it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's now a quadruple space, 3 spaces in between. And so what comes next is to, who it's going to. And so I don't need this word to anymore because it's not a standard memo. So I'm just going to delete. And the word EcoDrive goes there, followed by a double space. And after the double space is our subject. I'm just going to move the subject and put it where the from is. And I can actually just delete the word from. It's still in all caps. And so that makes life easier. Now let's take the from. The from now goes to the very bottom of the memo. And so we're going to move the word date and subject. Should be a double space here. And then after, all of the body would remain the same, but after your body, you're now going to press a quadruple space. 1, 2, 3, 4, quadruple space. And now you have Bahamas National Trust PAL coordinator is the from, and then a double space, and then we have typist initials. And so it looks very similar to a letter because the only difference is we would have the street address, the PO box, the island, the city included underneath EcoDrive committee. We may have had a salutation, we may have had a complimentary close. So it looks very similar to a letter, but it is indeed a memo. And so we're comparing side by side. You can see that they look the same. They carry the same information. However, the formats are extremely different. The from is in a totally different spot. We have the heading that's included, the word memorandum that's included, and you just have to understand the difference between the two. If you don't know the difference between the two, then you're setting yourself up to not be able to actually complete the task, okay? And so that's why it's important to know the difference between the two before you go into that exam. Now let's take a look at what we have here. Let's say we have a distribution list. What happens is the to is now going to be extended. And so I press enter, and I'm just going to tab over just where EcoDrive committee is. And maybe I want to send it to the BAMZ committee as well. And so what happens is maybe I want to send it to the BAMZ president as well. So I would do all of that together as one, and I would just continue to line everything off at the bottom. That's what I would do, or that's what you should do when you have that listing. Again, if you want to use commas, then that just means you use a comma in between each of the names, and you would make that adjustment there. The same thing happens if you were sending it to multiple persons here. You would do the same thing. Either you would put them across from each other, or what you would do is you would line them up accordingly as well. And so once the reader of the memo sees this, they know that it's going to the EcoDrive committee, BAMZ committee, and the BAMZ president, okay? And so that's pretty much how a distribution list works. It's pretty simple. You would know whether or not you need a distribution list depending on who the letter is being written to. So if it's multiple people or multiple committees or multiple positions, then you would list them accordingly. But let's say they say the class of 2023. The class of 2023 can be listed as one line because it's the class. They didn't list each individual in the class. And so that's a way as well to address a memo to multiple people without having to remember who or how many students are all a part of the class of 2023. Because could you imagine just writing a memo with all of those names? It should be rather difficult. All right. And so that's just a guideline as it relates to memorandums. Just like with letters, if you have to enter a table into a memo, what you want to do is, if you're including a table here, you want to make sure, I'm going to go to insert and table, create a little short table. You want to make sure that if you have a double space above, that you also have a double space below. So it should not look like this. We shouldn't have more space at the top of my table than at the bottom. And so I'm just going to delete any spacing and then make it even. Making it even always makes it neater, okay? Let's, for the sake of just showing you an example, this is an example of an entire paper or an entire question for a memorandum. So again, it just says create the form for the following standard memo using the paper provided at the rear of the booklet. Use a top margin and side margins of 1 inch. So that means our top margin of 2 inches does not stand for this particular memo. So you want to make sure you have it as 1 inches all around. You are to key your reference initials at the end of the task. That's just a great reminder. Doesn't happen all the time. And so in this case, they actually wrote it like a standard memo. I think, again, it's really to help persons to get it right. And so we see double space, all caps plus bold. So that means to, from, date, and subject should be double space in between, all caps, and bold. Sometimes you don't have to bold it, but in this case, they asked us to bold it. You have your grade 12, C.E. Francis, today's date, reminder. All of this needs to be typed, again, lined up straight. Today's date, of course, you're not typing today's date. You're going to put what the day's date is. And then reminder, collection of fees. They didn't ask you to put it in all caps, but you should put it in all caps just because you should know that it should be in all caps. When we look through the rest of the body, we see that we have a lot of proofreaders marks. We have this here. So before graduation, we're inserting the word the. This is also an insert as well. Therefore, I would like to bring to your attention that as of the date of this memo, less than 70% of our prospective graduates have paid their graduation fees in full. Full stop. When we see something like this, a lot of blank space afterwards, this tells us that there's a new paragraph. And so therefore you want to make sure you press enter after, because if not, if it was the same paragraph, these words would be right here behind it. And so it's okay. Look for these spaces to help you to determine where you should be starting a new paragraph if they don't tell you exactly. The following partial list contains the name of these students who owe more than 50% of their graduation fees. So they're giving us a little form of a table. And what they're doing with this table is they gave us a list of student names, they gave us amounts. You want to make sure whenever you're typing tables or whenever you're typing amounts, you want to make sure that your numbers line up. Just like when you're adding decimals, numbers with decimals, making sure your numbers in the ones and tens place are on top of each other and lined up normally to the right side of the page. Always read instructions first. They tell you to type the names in order of amount owed from highest to lowest. And so if you started to type this, you're going to have a lot of work making sure that you put this Denton person second, actually. Titson Osmond should be first, then Roxborough should be second, and so on and so forth. So if you read the instructions first, it saves you a lot of time. They also tell you to indent a 1/2 inch. And so what that actually means, some tables are not actually tables itself. It's just going to be a tabulation. And so what that means is that if I'm typing a table in here, of course it still stands. I want it to be even. If I'm doing a 1/2 inch indent, that means I'm just pressing the tab key, which takes me to a 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to type the names there. So let's see, Robert Sims, let's just put that there. And I want to put $100 for him. Then I press enter. When I get to the next name, I'm going to indent that as well because they want us to indent the whole thing. So Tom Sands, I'm going to press tab, and then I'm going to type $70. Now, let's zoom in. Let's make sure we understand this part. When we look at it, these are all indented appropriately. However, we can see that they're not in line. There's nothing underneath this zero, and this zero in the 10th, in the 10th place, 100th place, sorry, the 100th place goes underneath the other number in the 100th place. And so what that means is we're going to have to go in front and just press space until they're on top of each other. So if we were adding, we would have had to write it like this. And so therefore, that's a way of making sure that your numbers are in line. So let's say I have another number. I have the number 4. All the other numbers have 2 decimal points, so I must do the same. And so what I'm going to do, if I press tab, it's taking it too far. So that means the last tab, before it goes all the way over, I'm just going to press enter. And so, sorry, space, until I get it to line up. That's a pretty easy way to line up without having to remember some things. And so these are pretty important things to remember when you're typing letters and memos. You don't get a lot of them with tables. I cover tables in a different video. However, be prepared and know that you're going to have to remember those things. And so I'm going to include a link to the video on letters, and you can go through that and look for different scenarios or look for different things we talk about related to letters. And you're going to find that they're very similar as relates to memos. And so just to go back to our presentation here, just as a recap, a great recap, the format for memos, when we talk about memos, margins normally are 2 inches top, 1 inch left, right, and bottom, unless they tell you otherwise. Standard memos have the word memorandum at the top, center, and bold. They also have headings to, from, date, and subject in all caps, bold, and to the left margin. We have to tab to align the words. We double space after each heading. Heading should be in that same order, and the subject should be in all caps. In the body, you want to press enter twice between paragraphs, and if there are notations at the bottom, other than typist initials, they all come after your typist initials. Attachments and enclosures come before copy notations, okay? And so that's it as it relates to the format of a memo. I'm just going to show my screen one more time and give you a good example of the 2 styles of memos that we covered today. Standard memo, simplified memo. This memo has a distribution list that stretches across, separated with commas. This one has a distribution list where I press enter after each one. This one has a table with lines. This one has a table without lines that has a 1 inch indented margin. Okay. Memorandums that are standard start with the word memorandum, quadruple space, then your heading, to, from, date, subject, double space in between each, double space after the subject, the body, double space, and then typist initials. Your standard memo looks like a letter and also starts with the date, followed by quadruple space, the to, double space, subject, double space, body, quadruple space, and then we have the from, double space, the typist initials. Okay, so very important information to know. Once you understand and remember these formats and can change from one to the next easily, you save a lot of time if you type the wrong one. So it's important to know what formats are the right ones to type, and it's also important to know how to correct your mistakes without doing this. Delete. It's okay if you type it wrong the first time. You may not have to press delete to fix it. One of my comments I always make to my students, the undo button is your best friend. Undo. Just undo. Don't delete. Figure out a way to get it without sitting down and typing all of the information over, because you have 5 tasks to complete in that time and you want to give yourself enough time to check it over. One of the ways you can check it over is doing what I did, minimizing your screen so that you can look at the entire thing, or by going to File, Print, and Print Preview, or Print Preview. For my version, this is the print preview. And so print preview your document and look at it and see if it looks right. If it doesn't, then make the change. You can also save it as a PDF, and that allows you to be able to send your document for printing without any adjustments made to it. And so that's always something that I tell my students and something I've been trying to drill home with them. And so this is just my encouragement. Don't forget to look back at your work. Don't forget to make sure you're spacing is right and everything looks as even and neat as possible. And of course, don't forget to put your name at the bottom. Highly important. And so I hope that you've learned from this video because I've had fun sharing the information with you. And so I hope that you look forward to more on my page coming to you about different business topics, including keyboarding, office, and possibly accounts. But we look forward to you coming back. If you like the video, please leave a comment. If you feel there's something we could have done better, you can leave a comment as well, or you can send an email to the email that's attached to our YouTube page. But we look forward to hearing from persons that like our video or persons that really learn from it. And we look forward to putting more ahead in the future on these topics. So don't be afraid to share, like, and subscribe, because I am Miss B, Brendira, your business teacher pal.